everyone, it's Karina with Karina Loves to Plan. Thank you for joining me in my little corner of the internet where we talk all things planners, fountain pens, and fountain pen inks. Today I'm going through my April currently inked and doing a progress update on all of these. And I'll also show you all of my Zentangles and paper swatches in here, as well as all of the roses I've painted in my little MeePlus Planner. Let's get started. The first pen and ink combination was my Leonardo Momento Zero in the Via Lattea, and this is inked with Pen BBS number 443 in Mung Bean Cake. I did not get to use this as much as I would have liked, but this is still a beautiful and perfect match. No issues whatsoever. I gave the ink a 10 because it's stunning, the flow a 9 because I would like it a little wetter, and the comfort level of the Leonardo Momento Zero a 9. There is the finished Zentangle. I really like the extra fine nib for Zentangles like these. You can see more detail, but I also like that I've made these bigger so that it takes me not as much time to be able to complete these. But I feel like this actually does look better because then you could see the detail and you could, I don't know, I mean, while I loved the smaller ones, like where's a really good, like I love the smaller ones, it just felt like I was squishing the pattern into too small of a grid, whereas this, I feel like I could really see the detail of the pattern. And then when we look at Mung Bean Cake over the different paper swatches, look at how different it looks on like the onion skin, Yamamoto Bank, and even the Archivist paper. There's a little bit more pink that's showing here, and even in the, oh, that should be Midori, not Rhodia. But then not as much pink coming out in the Tomoe River paper or the Irofil. So really interesting how this ink has such different effects on the different papers. I still have a little bit of this ink left. I plan to, I don't want to hoard the ink, but I'm going to keep it for, I guess, another season and put it in another pen maybe next year. So that is my Leonardo Momento Zero Via Lattea with Pen BBS Mung Bean Cake. I forgot to show the roses. So these are in my MeePlus Planner. Now I'm not sure of the paper, but the paper itself is actually handling the painting with fountain pen inks really well. Not a lot of bleed through here, but it's so interesting how brown this looks. There's not as much pink coming out in this paper when I paint the roses. So sorry for forgetting that. Next up is my Hinze Pen Co. This is in the Model K in Heimdall, and I have it inked with Colorverse Brunch Date. Not an exact pen and ink match, but it was still really fun to use. This had great flow and there were no hard starts. So I gave the ink a 10 because you know me, I love a good dusty pink. The flow a 9 and the comfort level of the Model K a 10. So there's Colorverse Brunch Date, goodness gracious, on all the different papers, and I accidentally named it Herbin Roy Donka, but that was last month. So this is what it looks like on all the different papers. It definitely looks more coral when you have it swatched like this than it does pink. However, I'm noticing that it does just look more coral on the Archivist, the Tomoe River paper, the Rhodia, and the Midori, and it looks a little bit more pink here on the Irofil paper, and a little bit more on the onion skin, but a little bit more saturated on those shoe papers. And then when we look at the beautiful Zentangle, if you're not familiar with Waterman Carene, that's where I get most of my patterns because they're very, very easy to follow. And I love how this turned out. It gave me a chance to play with some of the shading in here, but also work on the fine lines. This is the type of Zentangle I like to do that has some fine lines, but also has some opportunity to color in some areas as well. So that is my Hinze Pen Co Model K in Heimdall with Colorverse Brunch Date. Wow, I keep forgetting to do the florals. Hold on. So the florals in my MeePlus Planner. It's nice to be getting back into these actually, and here we go. Whoop. So there is a Colorverse Brunch Date. Look at the shading that's happening here. So fun to paint with, and a beautiful rose with this type of ink. So now I can say it's my Hinze Pen Co Model K with Colorverse Brunch Date. Next we have my Laban 325 in Snow, and this is inked with a Sailor Ink Studio 273. Another great combo, but again, did not use as much as I would like. And sorry, there's a little fiber stuck in the nib here. Anyway, the ink is just so pretty. I gave the ink a 10 because I love the shading in this ink, the flow a 10 because I had no issues with flow, and the comfort level of the Laban 325 a 10. So here are the roses that I painted with Sailor Ink Studio 273. I love the chromo shading that's coming out here, but the chromo shading is only really happening in the saturated or the more saturated parts where you're basically lifting your brush and that's where the ink pools. It's not showing as much chromo shading as you would see on basically like Tomoe River paper or even onion skin. So maybe that's one of the drawbacks of the paper in the MeePlus Planner, is that it's not going to show as much chromo shading as maybe in the other papers that I'll show here. So if you see the different papers, so if you got the Archivist paper, you're definitely seeing chromo shading happening here. And then the Tomoe River paper, not as much on the Rhodia, a little bit on the Midori, and a tiny bit on the Irofil. But you can really see how different it looks on the Yamamoto bank and the bank paper. It looks almost green or yellow on these papers, hardly any pink, and then mostly pink on the onion skin. So really interesting how the different papers can show off those shading effects. And then this is the doodle or the Zentangle that I did. So when you look at the actual grid, for example, the grid is basically that, what's in the corner, and then it turns into this beautiful, beautiful doodle. That's what I really love about these, is that it starts off really simple, and then when it's all done, it looks like a really, really intricate drawing. So that is my Laban 325 in Snow with Sailor Ink Studio 273. Next up, I have my Estherbrook Estie in Honeycomb, and this has a needlepoint nib, and it is inked with Diamine Sepia, which I think is just the perfect match for this pen. This is a gorgeous combination, and I really had no issues with the flow in the needlepoint nib. It was just a lovely experience, lovely pleasure. It's all just lovely to write with is what I'm trying to say. So I gave the ink a 9, the flow a 9, and the comfort level of the Estie a 10. So there we have the roses painted in my MeePlus Planner. A little bit of shading happening here, but again, not as much chromo shading as you'd see on the other papers, but still a really good paper to paint on. Not a lot of bleed through happening here. It's just a fun little extra thing that I get to do with all of my currently inks, to see it like this. I don't know if this is something that I'm going to continue doing, but it's just fun to be able to paint the roses in a separate planner. Now we have the different paper swatches, and I really love how much more, I guess, caramel or orangey brown it looks on the Archivist paper and the Tomoe River paper, but then it almost looks yellow on, or golden on the onion skin, and definitely more orange on the Irofil. It's just really interesting how the different papers can make certain colors pop from that particular ink. And then we have the Zentangle. I love this one because when you look at the specific grid here, it's basically you start with a square and then you just work it until you get to the middle. A really simple Zentangle, one of the ones that I originally started with, but it then creates this really, really cool pattern, which I think is just perfect with the needlepoint nib. I love this nib so much because it's very fine, but it's got that slicey, smooth feel that I really, really love in a fine, super fine nib like this. So if you're ever curious about the needlepoint nib and you're at a pen show, I highly recommend going over to Kirk Spear's table for Pen Realm and trying out his needlepoint. His needlepoint is my absolute favorite, and he just knows how I like it. So that is my Estherbrook Estie in Honeycomb with Diamine Sepia. We now have my Pilot Kakuno, and this is in the, oh my gosh, I don't remember. Now I have to look it up. Hold on. It's called the Cumulus White, and I have this inked with the Pilot Iroshizuku Chiku-Rin. Again, not an exact match, but I wanted to use Pilot with Pilot. This extra fine nib is so smooth and wet, and it feels closer to a Pilot fine because of the Pilot ink. I gave the ink a 9 because it's just a gorgeous green, perfect for spring. I gave the flow a 9 because Pilot inks are just fantastic, and the comfort level of the Kakuno an 8. How wonderful do those roses look in this bright green, very perfect for spring. I feel like on this paper though, it's definitely coming out a lot more yellow, and maybe that's because there is more surface area of the ink that you can see versus just the writing sample. But then if we look at the different paper swatches, you can see how different it's actually even looking on all the papers. You can definitely see how much more green or saturated it looks on the Tomoe River paper, but it definitely looks more yellow on the Archivist or even the Midori and the Onion Skin. The Irofa looks very similar to the way that it looks on the Tomoe River paper. Just so interesting how that always works out. And then this Zentangle, it looks really simple, but the pattern really is just overlaying lines and then underneath, and it kind of looks like the strips of pastry that go across a pie, essentially. What is that? Please let me know what that name is, because the name escapes me now. So that is my, oh, where did I put the pen? That is my Pilot Kakuno in Cumulus White with Pilot Iroshizuku Chiku-Rin. And now we have my Waterman Carene in the Sea Green Shimmer. This has a, well, originally a fine nib that was ground down to an extra fine, and it is inked with Diamine Wishing Tree. Unfortunately, not the best combo, and I was hoping it would be. The shimmer was inconsistent, and unfortunately the nib needs work again. Darn. So I gave the ink an 8, the flow an 8, and the comfort level of the Carene an 8. I love how pretty the roses look, like it, just the shimmer and the base color, and how I like that kind of grayish green, but unfortunately it just wasn't what I wanted this ink to be. So I still have a little bit left, and I might end up giving it to some friends who live locally to give that a try. It's beautiful, but I think that could have been so much more. So then when we look at the different paper swatches, it's so interesting when we look at it, because is it gray? Is it brown? The base color is a little bit of both, and it's so interesting to see. You don't, and then even on the Archivist paper, there's a little bit of chromo shading happening here, but look at how much lighter it looks on the Onion Skin and the Yamamoto bank and the bank, and just how different that ink looks on that paper to that. Just amazing. And then the Zentangle that I did, something very simple, but only because the way that the ink was flowing out of the pen, it just wasn't a very pleasant experience. So I wanted something that was simple and not as complicated. And you're probably like, Karina, this looks pretty complicated on its own. But I mean, it was still a fun Zentangle to do regardless of the overall experience. So that is my Waterman Carene Sea Green Shimmer. And I think I do have to get, excuse me, the nib smoothed again, and with Diamine Wishing Tree. I'm losing my voice here. The next pen and ink combo is my Platinum 3776. This is in the Fuji Unkei Kinu-Gumo, and I have it inked with Herbin Vert Degree. And remember, this is my first extra fine platinum nib. Oh, wow. I use this every day in my 5-year journal, and I love it. This nib is so smooth and crisp. I gave the ink a 9, the flow a 9, and the comfort level of the platinum an 8. And there are the roses. I love how this ink looks more blue to me, or more dark teal gray, and there is some shading happening here, but I don't think this is the best paper to show off the shading. But it's still fun to be able to paint on this, but also see like all the crinkly pages once it's done is very satisfying. And then when we look at all of the different paper swatches and how it looks generally consistent across all of them, so nothing too exciting happening here. And then when we do the Zentangle, I feel like this particular pen, I could have done a smaller grid for these Zentangles, and I feel like this was almost too big for me to, I don't know, really appreciate the extra fine nib on the platinum, but it still looks really cool once it's all done. Whoops. So we have my Platinum 3776 with an extra fine nib with Herbin Vert Degree. Now I have my Franklin-Christoph in the Model 2, and this is the Van Ness exclusive. I got this secondhand from Reddit, and I'm just so glad because it's so pretty. This started off with a medium nib, and I got it ground down to a Kadachi grind by Matthew Chen. And this is inked with Warringal Robinson Crusoe. This was a fun combo, but unfortunately the writing doesn't truly show off the shading that you see in the swatch here. So I gave the ink an 8, the flow a 9, and the comfort level of the Franklin-Christoph a 9. Like, how fun does this color and this ink look? And you can tell there are some areas where chromo shading can happen, but it's really only happening in the bigger swatches rather than in the writing itself. And then when we look at the different paper samples, you can only really see some of the chromo shading happening maybe in the Midori and a little bit on the Tomoe and the Archivist and possibly on the Onion, but not as much on the other papers. And then we have the finished Zentangle. I really liked this one because I felt like I was trying to use the different I say layers or levels of writing and variations that you can get with Kadachi grind in this. Really fun to work with in the end. So that is my, don't fall over, Franklin-Christoph Model 2 Van Ness exclusive with Warringal Robinson Crusoe. And here we have my Zodiac Pen Co and Sagittarius. This is our Sea Glass Kaleidoscope, the collaboration that we did over the summer. And can we just appreciate the cracked ice on here? Just amazing. So I have this inked with Vinta Lakbai, which beautiful. And I'm telling you now, unfortunately, it doesn't always look like that. I so wanted this ink to work, but it just clogged up my pen and the shimmer was inconsistent. So I gave the ink an 8 because it's beautiful, but the flow a 5 because, yeah, no. And then the comfort level of the pen, a 10. See, the roses do look beautiful when you're painting with them. I think it's just the writing that did not work out well. I'm not sure what other pen I could try that ink with that it won't clog up, but painting with it is so fun, and I might possibly keep it for that. I don't know. We'll see. Really beautiful though how the shimmer does show off on that paper. And then when we look at the different paper swatches here, just taking a look at, you know, there isn't as much variation in all of these papers. I really just wish that the shimmer would show as consistently. Now, when I'm looking at this Zentangle and you look at it from different angles, you can kind of see the shimmer from the light here, and it looks cool, but I did have trouble with getting the shimmer to be consistent. I had to prime the feed quite a bit and then work my brass shims through the tines of the nib as well. So I just kept having to work on it to make it look even somewhat presentable. So that is unfortunately my Zodiac Pen Co in the Sea Glass Kaleidoscope with Vinta Lakbai. And now I have my Just Turnings in Moody Orchid. This is my most recent collaboration with Just Turnings in Australia, and this resin was poured by Turn Pen Co. Just stunning. And I have this inked with Diamine Nostalgia. I had high hopes for this, but unfortunately it bled through the paper in my journal and the shimmer just felt inconsistent, especially with the base ink feeling too dark. So I gave the ink a 7, the flow an 8, and the comfort level of the Just Turnings a 9. I love how the roses turned out because here you really can see what the ink could be, and I'm wondering if there could be some evaporation happening with this particular pen that's making the ink come out too dark, because this looks exactly the way that I wanted the ink to look in the writing. I wanted that kind of brown pinky purple base with the shimmer, but I didn't really get that in the writing sample. And then when I do the paper swatches, it just looks stunning. It had every potential of being such a stunning ink, but then in the writing sample, it didn't do what I really wanted it to do or expected it to be. Here, it definitely looks more dull than what you're seeing in the paper swatches. The paper swatches, it looks so vibrant and there's so much depth because of the different colors that are coming through in the base color, but then in the writing sample, it just looks dull. And I can't believe I'm saying that about a shimmer ink, but it does look a little dull. It doesn't have that complexity that you see in the paper swatches, and that's a little disappointing. But no issues with the pen itself, it was just the ink. So that is my Just Turnings in Moody Orchid with an extra fine nib with Diamine Nostalgia. Next we have my Estherbrook Model J in Violet, and this has a fine cursive smooth italic nib, and I have it inked with Pen BBS Strawberry Milkshake. Oh, I love this. I love how the ink goes down, then dries to a softer pink purple. I had absolutely no issues with the flow, so I gave the ink a 10 because it's stunning, the flow a 9, and the comfort level of the Model J a 10. And look how pretty this ink looks when you're painting with it. It really brings out the lighter portions of this ink. It doesn't look as saturated when you're writing with it, and I actually really prefer this. I wish most of the writing sample turned out this way, but that's okay. And then when we look at the different paper swatches, look at how much lighter it looks on the bank in the Yamamoto bank. It just definitely looks lighter here and less saturated, but I love how beautiful it looks on the Archivist paper. So stunning. And then this particular Zentangle was definitely fun to do with the fine cursive smooth italic nib because I could play with the line variations of the nib here. This one was really fun. So that is my Esterbrook Model J in Violet with Pen BBS Strawberry Milkshake. And last but not least, we have my Twsbi Eco in Cream Rose Gold, and this has a fine nib, and it is inked with Kitty Inkpot, Starry Sky, and Midsummer Night. Some might say this ink is too light, but I actually love it, and when it dries, it looks beautiful. It does need at least a fine nib though. So I gave the ink a 10 because it's stunning, the flow a 9, and the comfort level of the Eco an 8. I love how the roses look. Here you can definitely see the chromo shading happening. You've got kind of the grayish purple with a little bit of green and a little bit of blue. It's so interesting. I love Kitty Inkpot inks, and I may have to order more in the future. Then we have what it looks like on all of the different papers, and look at how different it looks on all the different papers. And I wonder what was happening here, why it looks so wonky, but it definitely looks more purple gray on the Archivist, and then you're seeing a lot more yellow and green coming out on the Onion Skin and the Tomoe River paper, the Yamamoto bank, and the Midori. Really interesting. But unfortunately, you don't get to see as much of that when you're doing just a regular writing sample. I still love the color that it comes across though, because it's one of those lighter colors that you don't think is going to actually show up on a page or be legible, but this one actually is. So that is my Twsbi Eco Cream Rose Gold with a Kitty Inkpot, Starry Sky, and Midsummer Night. So there are all of my pens and inks that I use for the month of April, and I may not have used some of them as much as I would have liked, but I'm pretty happy with how this all turned out. And I know some of you ask, what do you do with the ink that's still remaining in the converters? I don't force myself to finish it. By this point, I'm ready to move on to my May currently inked, so I am okay with putting these into like one big vial and then putting that down the sink. I'm absolutely okay with that. Life is too short to force me to use a pen and ink combo if I'm ready to move on. Which do you think, well, actually, that's not the question I want to ask. I was going to say, which one is your favorite out of all of these? For me, I think I really loved the Platinum Extra Fine nib. I loved writing with that every day, but I also loved writing with the needlepoint nib. I really love Pen BBS Mung Bean Cake, but I also loved Pen BBS Strawberry Milkshake. And unfortunately, the two shimmer inks in here, I was just really disappointed with, which is sad. And then, quick spoiler alert, I don't think I have any shimmer inks for May, which is interesting. All right, but that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. Otherwise, don't forget to hit that like button and to subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and have yourselves a great day.